What is going on, guys? This is Miasin. So I decided to make another top 50 best decks of the format. Yes, there are 50 decks in here. Not everything has to be fire, as you can clearly see. And the reason why I'm making this video is because the first time I made it, I felt like I didn't really understand enough about the metagame, and there are also a lot of decks that I forgot. So I covered 40 decks, but now I have got 50. And I want to see all those decks are, I guess, somewhat decent to a certain extent. Maybe some are like a little less good, which is the reason why I've got a pretty bad category here. But for the most part, we've got, the tier 0 decks, so the really big boys, and then the actual probably tier 1 contenders, and then we've got the rogue. A lot of decks are going to be going there, and then everything else. The decks that you probably should not bring to a YCS, but you can still bring to like regionals, locals, whatever. It's not going to change anything, especially if you're trying to play the game for fun. Anyways, before we proceed any further, I'd really appreciate if you could smash the like and subscribe button. Let's try to hit 1,000 likes. I know we can do it. And yeah, also shout outs to my sponsors, Inspire TCG, as well as Dueling Guard. And with that being said, let's get right into it. So the first deck is Tier Elements. The deck is just super frustrating now. Agido and Kelbeck getting banned honestly doesn't even bother me that much, but the fact that people are now back to playing a lot of Bestials in the side deck, it's just not in a really good position. And also the going second just feels really bad, but it does have a few decent matchups. So depending on how you deck build, it's not too bad. It's still a respectable deck, so I'm gonna put it in Rogue, not in Stop, but yeah. ABC, just not in a good position at all, because it's a deck that I want to say has a lot of weaknesses that pretty much every deck has here, but again, it loses to Bestials because it's a light attribute deck. Labyrinth is also, I had it in my like tier 1 section, but I don't like this deck anymore because, no, that's not true. I still like Labyrinth, but again, Bestials are like freaking everywhere now. So post game 1, it's a little rough. You do have to prepare yourself pretty much a lot for that. Otherwise, they will always banish all your monsters. So yeah, it is a little rough, but it's still doable. And if you go first against pretty much anything, usually you're gonna win. But going second against the far decks, not super ideal. Sharks, usually this would be in my stop, but because of two guys, I do have to put this in Rogue. So first of all, shoutouts to Loic and also Joak. I think that's his name, the guy who got top 32 at YCS Sydney. But freaking Sharks, man, out of everything, it's crazy. Anyways, pure Snake Eyes, I might as well do that now as well as Farking. There's no like real substantial difference between both. Like they really just look identical because they both get carried by the Snake Eye engine. But pure Snake Eyes, it plays less engine cards and more non-engine. So going second, I guess you just have a higher likelihood of drawing a hand traps, which is good. But at the same time, not every hand trap is good, and you can also break on too many hand traps. So the way to compensate that is by main decking 3 Lullaby of Obedience. But then if you're not in a tier 0 environment, you just draw those Lullabies and they do absolutely nothing. Just like it's a good deck, but is it really that much better than Farking? I think they're honestly on like very similar grounds. There's not even like that much of a difference between both. Infernoid is actually a very good deck, but to be fair, I will have to put it at the top of Rogue, even though, and by the way, when I say Infernoid, I'm talking about Snake Eye Infernoid because it has 1 card FTKs and everything. Obviously, that's the one way to play the deck at the moment, but then when we get the new support, the deck becomes more interesting than that, even though I don't think it's ever going to be benefiting that much off of the new support because the Snake Eye engine will most likely die before we get Terminal World, and it doesn't lose to like that much. So I mean, I could also put it in competitive contenders. Centurion is definitely one of them, but it's one of the worst ones out of like the really good decks that isn't fire because it's just like inherently so weak, but it has just a bunch of 1-card combos, super consistent, and you just have to resolve that in order to win. And you can easily play around Nibiru by not going into Emmet 6 effect on the opponent's turn, because that would make King Calamity be summon number 5, and then you just get your 2 monsters nibbed, and you might lose the simplified game state, but yeah, it's a really scary deck for sure. Flunderies, this is the best shifter deck, unfortunately. It's a very good deck, as much as I hate to admit it. Sword Soul, this is not super insane, but it's not trash. It's fine, honestly. Purely, I keep getting surprised at just how good this deck is, especially if built correctly. It just doesn't really look like it lost that much, and also people are removing Kurikaras from their side deck, so the decks that should have like an insta win against Purely, because of the fact that nobody can really expect the can really afford the luxury of respecting one single deck by playing one card in the side deck just for it. This deck is just thriving off of that, and it has a really nice setup that I think can just make you win against like any far player. If you end on like purely Beauty and the trap card, it's just game. You don't even have to use the trap card on standby phase to draw more cards, even if you got a happy underneath. Sleepy Memory. You just negate the Snake Eye Ash, and then you transform the Beauty into a Noir, and then you just spin their extenders. and you win the game. So yeah, it's a really scary combo. Phantom Knights. This also got to top 32 at YCS, says Sydney. Shout outs to Micah. Yeah, this deck is nice, but it's very hard to play. And also, just like tier, it does lose to Bestials a little bit. Not that hard because they all banish themselves from the graveyard as cost. So your opponent has to like banish preemptively. And then you can, if you can find a way to like foolish another one, then you can just keep doing the same thing. So it's actually a really nice deck, especially in the good hand and in the right hands. And the fact that you can play the Brave Token engine and the Horus engine, so you can make a Photon Lord and Wandering Griffin Rider to negate Nibiru and Imperm, is absolutely filthy. Voiceless Voice is what I want to believe is probably the best non-fire deck in Yu-Gi-Oh! At the moment. I think this deck is the nuts. Very, very good, and it doesn't need that much to win. It's really just you set up like Skull Guardian and a Floodgate. For some reason, they always have it. You could also go for Jowgen if you've got Branded Fusion into Albion the Sanctifier Dragon. Not everybody plays that, but again, if you are running those cards, then you're basically playing an FTK deck because nobody's beating Jowgen plus Skull Guardian. It's not back and forth, it's not enjoyable to play against, and I've lost to that, I mean, once. I was gonna say several times, not really, but you gotta lose a dice roll and then you gotta lose game 2 to that, so that you gotta win game 1 because they're not gonna be main decking Jowgen. Main decking Jowgen is stupid, don't do that. Goblin Rider, stop. Don't play that deck. Sky Striker, same thing. Both of these decks, they just do the same thing as all those combo decks, but by being infinitely more susceptible to hand traps. That especially applies to Goblin Rider, but Sky Striker is just not strong enough. You're not doing anything, so that's my issue. Recast and Avalon. This deck just looks really good, and I actually think it's in a decent position because, I mean, maybe not here, maybe here. Unless you're in Europe, then I would put it here, but the thing is, people are removing Droll from their main deck. I guess they're still kind of siding it. Bestials also do nothing against an Avalon, so people might have a lot of useless cards on their side, but still, 3 Ash, 3 Veiler, 3 Imperm, and potentially 3 Ghost Mourner. Salamangreat, another very respectable rogue deck, probably worse than Labyrinth. Yeah, I mean, it's a fire deck, but it doesn't even use, like, the Snake Eye card, so that's my issue. It's like, there's, like, a broken engine out there, and your deck can't even utilize it. But you can still use Princess, and Princess is great in Salamangreat. I love the interaction between Princess and Weasel, because you're summoning a monster to the opponent's field, and then you can trigger the Princess on turn 1, destroy, and then you basically just have more extra extenders, which is really nice. Alright, Chimera, that's kind of like a brain dead deck. I mean, it's way too linear. You don't need to be like super good at the game to play it, because it's the same thing every time. Normal summon Mirror Swords Knight, effect summon Berthomet, and then search. Yeah, it's going second. The deck is not fantastic. You still have to rely on hand traps, so you're not breaking boards like crazy. So yeah, it's kind of like a helmet deck. It's still a good deck, but it's not like insane. To be fair, Centuron is also very helmet, but it's like what it does with one card is better than what this deck does with one card. This is like a skip turn combo, which whereas this, I mean, you can kind of still handle this to a certain extent. Plunder Patrol, probably the worst rogue deck, but still a respectable deck. I'm not necessarily like laughing if I'm facing this deck because I still have to know exactly what they're doing, and a good Plunder Patrol player would probably scare me quite hard, so yeah. Runic-based strategies, or rather Runic Stun. People are removing back removal, huh? It's actually a decent deck. Yeah, it's probably like on par with Labyrinth. The Runic Stun maybe, but to be fair, Floodgates are also like almost all at 1. Runic Fountain is still a 2. And again, no Cosmic Cyclones in like most players' side decks. So if you go first and you draw your Floodgates, it's kind of just game. Yeah, this deck is scary. Okay, Dark World, this deck is horrendous right now. It's still, I mean, I'm still gonna put it here because if you win the dice roll, it's game, but if people are back to main decking 3 Droll, forget about it. This deck is horrendous because all it takes is for you to get Drolled and your deck does nothing. Exorcister is definitely a stop. Like, you just don't play that deck at all. It's the only shifter deck. No, sorry, it's not the only one, but one of the few shifter decks where you can have shifter and still lose. Because, yeah, the deck is very weak to a lot of things, and you might play into Nibiru if you want to go for a big board, but if you don't make a big board, then you can still lose to other things. And going second, this deck has 2 layers of plays, that's it. 1 normal summon, and the summon of Martha, and the extra normal summon of the Spirit Monsters, that's it. Despia, this deck is comparable to like Voiceless Voice and Flunderies, extremely good deck, going first, second. It doesn't play hand traps, which is the one drawback, but you can play Bestials as your hand traps. So against Pure Snake Eye, you're fine. Against Voiceless Voice, you're more than fine. Against Far King, you're fine. Against Flunderies, you can scoop like directly because I think the matchup is just like really, really shitty. Like Mirror Jade banishing monsters is also really bad because they don't really mind getting banished. So yeah, Flunderies has a very good Despia matchup. And also if you Gimmick Puppet lock them, they literally thank you. It's like 1 extra body for tribute summoning, which is not good for you. This is Bestial Runic. I don't like this deck too much, but it's still a Runic based strategy. So it's still, actually it's not bad. It's definitely not bad. Goatee is also in the same boat, but Goatee is water, so it's also super effective against the best decks. Haha, lol. This deck is nice, and one of the best things about Goatee is the fact that it's so resilient. Like, you can hand trap the deck 27 times, and they will always do the same thing. It doesn't matter. Like, the ceiling level isn't insane. It's really just you're playing Goatee because nobody reads the cards, so I guess you're taking advantage of people's ignorance, and the deck just doesn't lose to much. You can't play Shifter, but if you do, I don't think you can play the Runic Engine, or you can play Runic Goatee, but then you can't really afford the room for hand traps and stuff like that. So there are a few ways to play Goatee. I'm not super good with it, but it's definitely a deck that has nice potential. And in the future, I could see myself maybe playing this deck. Maybe, just maybe. Trap Tricks. This is one of the really good trap decks that isn't Labyrinth, but trap decks in general just are not good at all at the moment. Labyrinth being the exception because it's a trap deck that can start playing the game right away. It doesn't have to wait multiple turns. I do have Eldritch here. Might as well cover Eldritch. This is also a deck that I do not really recommend playing because going second will not feel really nice. You don't have enough ways to just apply pressure right away. You can just set a bunch of back row and then like a lot of decks can go like IP into SP, start banishing your stuff. And then if you go like I don't know, like a board wipe trap card, then they can go SP banish until the end phase and then get everything back. And then you can't really clear stuff. And then your engine cards can get ashed, belled. You can get bestialed. It's really bad. Honestly, it's in the same boat as Labyrinth, but it's even worse because it's slower. Virtual World, this is worse than Tier Elements, and it's also worse than Phantom Knight for sure. Is it worse than Shark? Yeah. Nah, I don't even know. I guess I will put it worse than Shark because people don't even know like what... I mean, people know what the Virtual World cards do. But the reason why I still think this is a good deck, sorry, I almost died, is because you have a lot of easy ways to go into Beatrice, and Beatrice is FTK, because you just send a transaction roll back with the Mayakashi trap card, Eradicator Virus, and that's a game. Magus Spectre, don't play that deck at all. It's just not good. It's still a decent deck if you want to play, at least I guess for fun, but going second, if you don't draw hand traps, you are never breaking boards going second at all. Like, just literally not at all. You're just searching a bunch of trap cards. You're playing a lot of bricks as well. You're playing a lot of non-pendulum cards, or cards that just don't really get your stuff going. But you do have a decent amount of starters, so it's not like the end of the world. And you honestly still lose to Ash, Veiler, Imperm, and stuff like that to a certain extent, because the Link 2 can get Veilered or Impermed, and the spell card that quickly that special summons from deck can get ashed. So this deck should not really lose to hand traps, but it still manages to find the way to lose to them. It's really sad. Vanquish Soul, I hate this deck from the bottom of my heart. I actually don't think it's good, but I guess if you know how to play the deck, then it's fine. I think you have to like start playing a bunch of floodgates in order to make this deck work, because only its engine is just not enough to win at all if you go first. And if you go second, forget it. It's basically Shifter or Bust, but even if you have the Shifter, it doesn't do much. Unchained, that is... Actually, it's fine. It's probably a little better than Vanquish Soul. Still not super ideal with only one Sharvara, but I did see Cody, I believe... Cody Manabe winning a regional with this deck, I think, with like one Sharvara, so it's fine. Probably better than Tier Elements even. Rescue Ace... Rescue Ace is good. Probably... It loses to a lot of things, though. It loses to, like, generic cards like Duster, Lightning Storm evenly. You don't even need a hand traps necessarily. Whereas these decks, I feel like you kind of need a hand traps. Fire King, I guess you can get away with board breakers like Soul Release and stuff. But Pure Snake Eyes, board breaker is not really ideal because they can make Omni Negates like Borreload Savage and Baron de Fleur. Purely can also, like, wipe the floor with a Rescue Ace because they have the field spell and then everything targets. Mud Dragon of the Swamp, so Super Poly Instant Fusion, whoopsies. All those cards also destroy this deck, so, I don't know. I would be reluctant to playing this deck, honestly. Even though I still think it's a good deck. It's still a fire deck, it's still good. It still plays Snake Eye Populace with Bonfire, so it has a lot going for it. And it was the best deck last format, which is crazy. Altergeist, it's another trap deck. It can't really be super good, unfortunately. Orchest, okay. This deck was honestly... This deck is a huge disappointment. I was expecting it to be so much better, but it's just not. It plays a lot of bad cards that if you draw and if you don't have like discard cards, they just stay in your hand doing nothing. And again, there's just so many bestials running around. So if you go like skeleton target like the Dingirsu on the opponent's turn, they can just chain the bestial, and then sometimes your IP doesn't even have another monster to like link off with, so it's like a 1-for-2 trade. It's really bad in your favor as an Orcust player. So I don't like this card, this deck whatsoever. Infernoble, another deck that I don't like because no Isolde means less consistency. Less power, not really, because I still think you can make some really nice boards. But yeah, it's not good enough, at least not to compete against those decks. And also, you're playing the fire cards like Diabellstar and everything. Not that Diabellstar is a fire, but you get what I'm saying. So Lullaby of Obedience, that is being main decked in this deck, can definitely call Diabellstar blind on game 1, and it will have its impact. Generator, this is kind of like a trap deck in a way. Not really, because it reminds me, it has kind of like the same feel as a trap deck, like it plays a little slow. It's a control deck. It's not like a combo or mid-range deck, even though it does have some combos, and it can play fast. It doesn't suck. It does play a lot of actual garnets that if you draw, you're screwed, unless you play even more bricks that make them so that you can draw them and they're not bad, but then like you're playing so many bad cards that it's like, ugh. I don't know, like the generator monsters in the generator deck are shit, except for Lopter or whatever the name is. It's not a garbage deck, but it's not like a fantastic deck. Kashtira, don't like this deck at all. It's a shifter deck, but it loses to a lot of things. It breaks a lot if you don't have a monster. I can't count the amount of times I've seen people draw like a bunch of Theosis, Birth, and Handshafts, but no monster. Like, they're like one body away from winning, and then the top deck field spell, and then they activate it, and it gets ashed. Must not be nice, because, yeah, imagine if you drew that unicorn. Then you can get ashed, and it's fine. You just go Theosis or something, or Fenrir. Anyways, Runic Sprite for hire. It's actually a good deck. It's not bad at all. Manadium. One of the best rogue decks, but the thing is, people are actually playing Bestials again in the side, and they're still siding Droll. I've already mentioned this for as a case for, like, other decks. But, I mean, this is even more true for Manadium because this deck is horrendous against Droll and Bestials. Very, very bad. Runic, Earthbound, same boat as for hire, almost, and like Bestial and everything. All those decks, honestly, are like in the exact same category. They're all like Runic-based strategies, so, yeah, same strengths and same weaknesses, almost. But, again, same league. Dragon Link, not a horrendous deck, might have some nice potential in the future, so it's not too bad. Mechanico, no, don't play that deck. Raid Raptor, so of course if you know me, you would know that I would love to put this deck here, but it's unfortunately not really in this situation at the current moment, so I'd probably have to put it, let's see, not too far away from, yeah, Salamangreat, Chimera, etc. Yeah, it's probably like somewhere in the middle of Rogue. It's a good deck. It definitely can do some wonders because if you go first, you can ignore Ash, Nibiru, or Droll. Not like all of them at the same time. But Valor and Imperm, a little rough because you can still play around them with Raider's Wing, but you're not always going to draw those hands. So yeah, the deck doesn't really suffer too much from consistency issues, and you can still play a lot of non-engine, like especially Handtraps because Board Breakers in that deck. Hell nah, I tried everything, didn't really work too fine. So yeah, it's still a good deck though. Ashen, this is actually the worst deck in stop. Brigade, no, this is also in stop. It's not really good. Sprite, this deck doesn't suck at all. It's also comparable to, actually, I'm gonna put it above Raid Raptor. It plays a lot of Handtraps, and it has a really bright future because of Mirror Magic of the Ice Barrier. So it's a good pick at the moment. You might want to look into it for the future. Blackwing, another respectable deck, comparable to like Raid Raptor and stuff. It doesn't lose the Imperm, though, on the other hand. It doesn't lose the Droll that hard, because you can also get, like, multiple searches in the same chain, and then you're doing a lot of dumping from deck to grave, and special summoning from deck or extra deck, so it's not even that bad, but sometimes the deck just scoops to one single Ash. Or, like, going second, it's even worse. Like, you lose to, like, a bottomless Chapel on the Simoon when you go, like, activate Black Whirlwind and you normal summon it. Or, like, some stupid things like that. I don't know. Ubel, another decent deck. Not at the moment, it's not, like, insane, but it doesn't suck either. Very nice potential for the future, and it does use the Unchained engine, so I think this is the superior Unchained deck. Marincess, another deck that reminds me a lot of Sprite because it plays so many Handtraps and it plays with one single card. This deck is very consistent, very reliable. It doesn't lose to Bestials. Obviously, it doesn't really lose too hard to any one card. Nibiru might be rough, but again, you're not overcommitting. You're only using one card from your hand, so it's completely respectable. And Dinomorphia is actually the second best trap deck that I can think of. I'd probably not put it here though, probably after the runic decks, but it's the kind of deck that can still kind of surprise you going second. You can still summon the Skill Drain Floodgate, and that's still annoying even going second, but going first is... It's pretty much just game if your opponent doesn't have the out to it. Even though it's a dark deck, it doesn't really lose to Bestials all that hard because you don't really care about what's in your graveyard. It's not like Labyrinth where you do lose to Bestials to a certain extent, but this deck is just so flexible that like the pros outweigh the cons. That's the reason why this deck is, I want to say, the best trap deck. For the most part, I think this is a somewhat decent tier list, but if you guys disagree or anything, let me know in the comment section below. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you guys very soon. Peace.